August 18th, almost here. Gubernatorial races. Some say it's all about Donalds, all about Jolly. Donald's the Democrat. Excuse me, that would be news. Byron Donalds, a Republican. I just made major news. I switched Byron Donalds' party. Byron Donalds, a Republican, supported wholeheartedly by President Trump's really boosted him. And David Jolly, the once Republican, now Democrat, at least before primary day, voters have their say. Maybe we get what would have to be a mega surprise, but it looks like we're headed towards, is that fair, do you think?
Well,
Donalds-Jolly matchup?
Byron Donalds is so confident in his potential for winning that even though his opponents, Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins and former House Speaker Paul Renner, have encouraged him to debate, and he has refused to debate them. David Jolly came back and countered and started challenging him to debate, but Donalds is saying, well, let's wait till the primary is over.
Why is that, Brian? They don't want to give any oxygen in the room to people who have very little in the way of their
Byron
fundraising.
Donalds has $90+ million where...
Why give them a stage?
Yeah, I mean, Jay Collins and Paul Renner combined, I think, have $1.50. So, they just have so little money compared to Byron Donalds.
But I don't want to sound overly facetious. I remember a day when it was expected, and you and I, in our roles at the Post and me both at WPTV and in Miami, expected. And so politicians came for primary debates and the like. So I don't like this trend that people shut each other out. And by the way, Republicans and Democrats do it. I've had Democrats who refused to do debates with those running against them. So this is across party lines.
They absolutely should debate, and they owe it to the voters. Yeah. But they try to campaign on social media now, so they don't feel like that they need to have a debate. And strategically, I can understand why. One of the big differences now in the social media era is that, you have a debate, and in the past it would just be on TV and the newspapers would report about it and it was done. But now the tiniest little mistake, even while the debate is still going on, suddenly is all over the place on social media, and you lose control of your narrative. And a lot of campaigns fear that. It's not so much that they fear the debate. They fear that little 10-second thing that, like I said, right in the middle of the debate will be all over social media. And then you wind up trying to defend whatever little mistake you made, and everything else you said is ignored.
Yeah. I remember the day not that long when Rick Scott became governor. And it was just sort of expected. And he made the rounds, and he didn't love.
Yeah.
He was not comfortable with media interviews. But you remember as days gone by, it was just expected, and every candidate or everybody elected, Rick Scott would sit down, do interviews. I mean, those days largely are gone where they try and do an end run. So I'm all for them sitting down. But the reality is, don't hold your breath. Congressman Donalds, as you said, has got a massive war chest, and it can sort of say, I'm going to do the stiff arm. And then on the Democratic side, it seems like Dave Jolly is likely going to be the guy.
Likely.
And as part of that, Isadora Rangel, who used to be our guest and worked at Treasure Coast for many years, now with the Miami Herald, she talked about what the expectations are, at least going in, and always interesting. She's always a great guest, and we had a chance to talk to her.
We should note that she's an opinion writer for Miami Herald, not a reporter.
Right. Senior editorial board member, Miami Herald, worth reiterating. Senior editorial board member. I've got it right in my Chiron, my Super 4. Let's listen to what Isadora had to say.
It seems that both sides have sort of already decided whom their nominee is going to be. On the Republican side, Byron Donalds is leading by, I want to say, triple digit. I mean, at least a few dozen points ahead of his other opponents. And on the Democratic side, I think David Jolly has been campaigning for a really long time. Dottie Joseph, who is a state representative from Miami, filed kind of sort of like a late challenge to David Jolly. And I think everybody was a little surprised that she waited so long to file. She says she wants to give Democrats a choice. The way I interpret that is that, David Jolly is a former Republican congressman from the Tampa Bay area. I think some Democrats are hoping for a progressive choice on the ballot. I just don't think that she has been campaigning long enough to be a strong challenger to David Jolly. But I think then we'll see in November. Florida has become a a real red state.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats think that by nominating a former Republican, they have a chance of appealing to the sort of the missing middle. And that remains to be seen. You know, we always promise blue waves in Florida, but sometimes they materialize in the rest of the country and they don't materialize in Florida. It's happened before. So, but I'm curious to see how well the Democrats do.
Brian, you know this. You've talked about red state dynamics. You were one of the first years ago said, Mike, I'm tired of people calling it a purple state. It's a red state.
Yeah.
I think everybody
Has been for years.
Has joined Brian there. Isadora did, she said something that kind of made me chuckle. We're always talking, maybe there'll be a blue wave nationally. He said, and then the blue wave does not make it to Florida. And, so you're going to hear from Democrats, we could have a blue wave this year. Are you out there with your binoculars looking for a blue wave?
They're talking about, Palm Beach County for the first time becoming a Republican county.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a huge blue wave in Florida. I think the one wise thing that the Florida Democratic Party is doing is they seem to be concentrating more on local races.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to recognize that over the years to come, they need to build from the bottom up. Certainly, they'd love to win the U.S. Senate seat and the governor's office. But I think there's somewhat of an understanding even among them that it's a bit of a long shot. And so they're concentrating a lot on local races, and that's probably a good thing.
And, you and I sit, but to be very clear to our audience, I mean, listen, we're old reporters. We want to cover as many races as we can and cover all sides of that race. We don't know what's going to happen.
No.
Election day, who knows? It's a long time. Well, it's not too long as we sit here now. The primary, August 18th, is coming up on us. But, listen, what happens in primary day in November, and that's the great thing about it. It's up to the Florida voters. It's up to turnout. We'll see what happens. If you and I counted every time there was a surprise that went against the conventional wisdom, we both could have retired 30 years ago.
I was talking to a worker just the other day and who listens to our podcast. And, first thing he said to me, he says, I'm very concerned about property insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And while the state has made some effort to reduce property insurance, if your insurance went up 100% and they reduced it 10%, you still have a 90% increase. So a lot of people are still feeling the pain of property insurance.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of messages that might help Democrats in statewide elections. They can honestly point the finger at Republicans and say, you guys have been in charge since Jeb Bush was governor. What have you done about property insurance? And,
other affordability issues.
And other affordability issues, so, but, who knows what the world's going to look like on August 18th.
The Herald Editorial Board, Miami Herald Editorial Board to the south, has already taken a stand on this whole property tax debate that will require 60% of the vote by you, the Florida voters, in order to pass and greatly increase homestead exemptions, which means a big cut to tax bills for you, the homeowner, but it can also mean huge cuts. Counties are screaming across the country or across the state. In fact, it's as we talk about that, it was interesting. I looked up some Florida politics always does a great job, and among other things, they said, for instance, Byron Donalds, fiscally constrained counties shouldn't sing for supper if Amendment 3 passes. Amendment 3 can pass, another article says, but only if voters never learn what it does, meaning big budget cuts. Rick Scott, now our senator, our former governor, worried about the property tax amendment hurting his county. This is going to be a centerpiece of both the run-up to the primary, I think, and certainly, as you've talked about many times, to November. That's how big and crucial that vote can be.
And one person who's noticeably silent about the very plan that he pushed the legislature into doing, Governor Ron DeSantis, is backing away from the property tax amendment. He's saying virtually nothing about it. His excuse is, well, they didn't quite go as far as I wanted them to go. Mm-hmm. No, I think he thinks it's going to lose, and he doesn't want to have his name attached to his last big effort as governor. So if he thinks it's going to lose, that doesn't say much for the future of the property tax amendment.
Isadora Rangel and the editorial board of the Herald weighed in on this, and we want to give you a chance to hear what she and they have had to say thus far.
I think it is the biggest vote that you as the voter will take. I mean,
agree.
I encourage people on the editorial board of the Miami Herald, where we write opinions, we have come out against it. I think I can name you a couple of reasons why, or if would you like me to just more
Yeah,
give
absolutely.
an analysis? One of the issues for me is how rushed this whole process was. The governor has been talking about property tax cuts for roughly a year, waited until June to push forward, to call a special session. But basically, there was no homework done about the impacts, and a part of me feels that was on purpose. So the lawmakers have 2 to 3 days to pass legislation to put this measure on the ballot. There's barely any discussion, no analysis, real analysis of the impacts that this will have on local government's budget. And remember, those budgets pay for public safety, number one. They also pay for parks, library,
Local
debt
roads.
service. So every time your local government issues a bond, say to build something, it's paid for, it's paid off with property tax dollars, and all these other services like that people like, events, etc., the smaller stuff. But there's some big ticket items that are going to be impacted. And I think the promise that lawmakers are making is that they are going to preserve what they call core services. But I think the problem is how, when you're cutting the revenue source to pay for those things. And on the other hand, I understand that voters and homeowners, Florida has become unaffordable. There's no doubt. And property taxes, because property values have increased so much, have gone up for a lot of people. I believe that the biggest problem in Florida, if they were going to do property tax cuts, it would be a more targeted approach, focusing on groups of people who need it the most. So first-time home buyers who have no equity, who are really just trying to enter the market, they're struggling a lot. So are seniors, people who cannot keep up with these increases, not only in property taxes, by the way, but homeowners insurance, groceries, gas, etc. I think that this blanket one-size-fits-all proposal that's on the ballot might have a lot of unintended consequences. But I also think that it's very likely to pass because people, they need relief, and I think they will take what they can get, because we're talking about people at risk of losing their homes, at risk of leaving the state. So, we cannot downplay the fact that people actually need relief, but you got to think of the consequences, is what I'm going to say.
So again, the Herald opposes the measure for cutting property tax, Amendment 3, and you've talked about this a lot, and many have, not just you, not just the Herald editorial board. Why not target relief to struggling first-time buyers? Isadora Rangel posited that question, or to seniors who maybe needed specific kinds of help. But it'll be interesting how it plays out. However, she did note, and you and I've talked about this, wouldn't bet against it passing. People are hurting. And if there's a chance to not hurt so much when you're having trouble affording living in Florida, I think a lot of people, and Isadora talked about this too, obviously nobody knows what's going to happen, but could see it happening. People are hurting in a lot of places.
The best thing that could happen to that amendment between now and November, gas prices going way up, groceries going way up.
You mean in terms of it passing? Yeah.
Yeah. If people suddenly are paying $4.50 a gallon for gas, and they're paying a lot more for milk and bread at the store, and it's hurting their pocket, and they can get a couple of $1,000s from a reduction in their property taxes, it helps offset some of the losses they may be taking. Especially among retirees and others who are on fixed incomes, it could be. So a lot's going to depend on what things look like come November. But and there's been a lot of support for it among average voters. And, part of what cities and counties are doing to push back, Palm Beach County was an example. They talked about, parking fees on the beaches, county beaches that don't have parking fees now. Well, they got so much pushback on that they said, never mind, we're not going to do that. But so that's the yin and yang of what's going on. The cities and counties threatening a cut to services and increased fees coming for them. And the flip of that is what's
relief at home.
Economic relief.
Well, and there were earlier versions of this before the legislature this year that would have offered more protection to emergency services, police, fire, and the like. We recently had folks talking to us about that said, listen, this new version, emergency services are exposed too. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with that. And watch, don't throw anything at me through your podcast screen. Watch the ad campaigns on both sides of this one leading up to November. Final thing, congressional redistricting that the Herald editorial board's keeping a close eye on. It's hard to keep track. And I know for our viewers, listeners, it's hard to keep track anyway.
Yeah.
Republicans hoping for a net advantage to send more people to Congress this year. It's been part of a national tug of war done state by state over redistricting, but Florida's been deep in the middle of it, redistricting, and the Herald's trying to make sense of it too. And Isadora Rangel talked to me about that.
Florida did redistrict a bunch of seats in South Florida and really changed the landscape, particularly in Broward County. Broward County has been known as the bluest part of the state for a really long time. And all of our representatives in Congress were Democrats. Now that the new districts have been redrawn, you have a Republican-leaning district, which is like West Broward, but then covers an area that stretches all the way to Marco Island. Go figure. How is that even possible? And then you have a black seat, which I believe is District 20. And then you have a coastal seat, which is considered a toss-up seat. And that is the incumbent is Jared Moskowitz, who's been a member of Congressman, a Democrat for a couple of terms. Again, another district whose shape is bizarre. It runs from Miami Beach all the way to almost Delray Beach. Like, talk about like very different areas. But regardless, the black district, which is District 20, there's a lot going on there. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is a sitting member of Congress, decided to run in that district. A lot of the other candidates who are all black, they're really mad at her in the Democratic primary because they believe that this is a seat that should be held by a black representative, especially in light of the Supreme Court's decision that allowed several states to dismantle black representation. They feel, why are you coming for this seat? So that race is going to be very interesting to watch. The problem is, I think, there are so many candidates in that race that Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually has a shot at winning. And there were talks before qualifying ended of the remaining candidates sort of coalescing around one candidate, but that didn't happen.
Brian, on a good day, it's hard to keep track of all this. Your take on the rigmarole going on with redistricting, even in the run-up to voting. Voting supervisors are saying, hey, make sure you're going to the right place. Districts have changed everything else.
Yeah, I mean, they had to change ballots.
Yep.
They had to, change the whole system almost overnight because, the people forget ballots get mailed pretty early.
Yeah.
So, people who may have been used to living in a district, say District 22, with, so-and-so being their member of Congress, suddenly they're not living in the district. And I think a lot of people don't even realize it yet. Well, I think they may get their voter ID card and they'll say, oh, why does it say 23? And that'll be the first time and even then I'm not sure they'll realize that more than just the number was changed, So, it's not the kind of thing people think about every day.
Right. And it used to be once every 10 years you get a new census, you redistrict it.
Right, so.
But gerrymandering's been going on forever.
Forever.
And they're doing it here in Florida, a red state, and they're doing it in blue states too. So it's a political Donnybrook across the country, whether either side, and that's a real true advantage. Will there be a blue wave in November? Will it negate all the redistricting going on? Will Republicans come to the fore and make a huge difference? And changing some of the seats in places like Florida will make a substantial difference in keeping the House. The bottom line, and you've talked about this for a long time, gerrymandering's either a good word or a nasty word, depending on which side of the discussion you're on. You've said that to me for years.
Yes, I have.
Any other thoughts here, Brian? I mean, we've got so much building up here. Property taxes, the big races, big Senate race too. You've got Ashley Moody, Alex Vindman. Ashley Moody,
She got appointed to the position.
What I'm hesitating to say, I don't like to say shoo-in about anything. They have elections, but she'd be the prohibitive favorite, let's just say.
Yes.
That's my hesitancy here, because it's not our place to say that. And Alex Vindman seems to have the inside track as well on the Democratic side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although Alex Vindman, this is the intra-party warfare going on. State Representative Angie Nixon, more progressive, has been saying, debate me, debate me, debate me. And he has been giving her the stiff arm. Remember, so it's Democrats do it to each other
exactly.
too, not just Republicans. But it's interesting that Florida politics, if you don't read them, you and I, they're a great group. And A.G. Gankarski does a lot of great work there, among others. But the bottom line is black voters are not happy about the fact that Vindman is trying to give the stiff arm to her. And so, it all goes to whether people will be enthused to go out to vote if they feel like their candidate leading into the primaries not being listened to and giving a chance to make their case. So it's not just about what happens in November. It's about people saying, wait a minute, we want her voice to be heard. Why won't you debate her? Alex Vindman, frankly, same thing. Why give oxygen to somebody that you think is not where you are, at least according to the polls, which I know you hate, but that dynamics works both ways.
Yep,
Talk
sure
about
does.
that.
Sure does. And it also, his refusal to debate now potentially gives Ashley Moody, she'd be the nominee for the Republicans, a reason to tell him when we're in the general election, no, I'm not going to debate you. You didn't want to debate. Why should I debate you now? So she may decide to debate him, but if she needed an excuse to avoid debating him, he's handing her one.
August 18th, just about upon us. Final thoughts as we lead into the big day.
Well, my biggest thought is go vote.
Yeah.
It's important that you go vote. And if you have any comments about what's going on that you want to share with us, please comment and subscribe if you will.